Luigi's Mansion 3 is an action-adventure game that came out in 2019. Following the first and second Luigi's Mansion game, in which Luigi partners up with Professor Egad to defeat King Boo and save the Evershade Valley, in Luigi's Mansion 3, King Boo returns and captures Luigi's friends from their hotel, trapping them in frames. The problem? Luigi alone can save them. In this video, I will talk about tutorial goal and game structure, Joy will cover gameplay elements, Megan, affordances, Lulu, game flow, Amy, player experience, and Zara will conclude with an evidence synthesis. The goal of the game is simple. Luigi has to save his friends from being trapped in King Boo's art collection by making his way to the top floor of the hotel. In the tutorial level, Luigi explores the first floor in the basement. With the help of his companion, Polterpup, the player learns the core vacuum mechanics, how to defeat ghosts, what might cause damage, like the rats and ghosts, what kind of objects the player might interact with, and frees Professor Egad, who sets up his temporary lad, and then hands him the virtual Boo to communicate with him. During the tutorial, Luigi also finds a new flashlight bulb, the Dark Light device, which releases treasures and characters from their frames.
This makes for a guided experience, with Polterpup often showing Luigi where to go, while leaving the player with enough freedom to discover features themselves.
The player wins if they reach the final top floor of the hotel and defeat King Boo, releasing all of Luigi's friends, and lose if Luigi loses 99 health points. As for player controls, Luigi can move front, back, and to the sides using the left joystick, click X to interact with objects, like doors, looking into windows, opening chests, and hold B while walking to run. A lot of the controls are the same from Luigi's Mansion 2, but as a refresher, and for new players, Polterpup shows Luigi how to hold A to charge and release the flash, the strobe bulb, hold ZR to vacuum suck, ZL to vacuum blow, and clicking ZR and ZL simultaneously to create a powerful blast. Game mechanics are gradually introduced naturally as the story progresses. Some shown in the tutorial include the ghost fighting combat style, which interestingly is not explicitly taught, but was present in Luigi's Mansion 2. Opening locked doors that have a dark circle with a yellow outline using a strobe bulb flash, which also isn't explicitly taught, as well as finding hidden golden keys to unlock new hotel room doors to explore. The game loop in this game is simple. Select a floor in the elevator, explore it to complete the mission, which often includes solving puzzles and defeating ghosts, get more elevator buttons, and explore the next floor. With that, let's move on to gameplay elements.
In Luigi's Mansion, the tutorial does not rely too much on direct instructions. Instead, it guides the player through the environment, Luigi's reactions, and small controlled interactions. The game world is introduced when Luigi arrives at the mansion and explores dim, mostly empty rooms. Since there is no immediate threat, the player has time to look around, notice doors and objects, and understand how the rooms connect. This shows that moving forward depends on exploring each area and interacting with the environment. Then, when Luigi is brought to Professor Egad's lab, the structure changes. The mansion feels uncertain, while the lab feels like a safer place to learn. This contrast helps the player understand that the lab is where mechanics are introduced, and the mansion is where those mechanics are applied. Luigi's character further shapes how players approach the game. His nervous reactions, from trembling when standing still to flinch at ghosts, show that he isn't a character built for direct combat. As a result, the player learns to approach encounters carefully and rely on tools instead of attacking right away. Luigi's nervous animations also make the player slow down and think before acting. This cautious approach is reinforced by the game's rules and constraints. Early in the game, locked doors show that the player cannot move forward freely. To progress, the player needs to find keys and return to certain spaces. Ghost encounters also teach a clear sequence of actions. Ghosts cannot be captured right away. The player first has to stun the ghost, reveal its heart, and then use a poltergust. This helps the player learn the correct process instead of just pressing buttons randomly. By limiting what the player can do at each step, the game makes the main mechanic easier to understand before moving on. The interface also supports learning without showing too much information at once. The heart meter shows the result of taking damage, so the player can clearly see when they made a mistake. Other information, such as ghost health, only appears during ghost encounters. This keeps the screen simple while still giving useful feedback when the player needs it. Since the information appears during the action, the player learns by playing instead of just reading instructions. Audio and visual feedback reinforce this process. Changes in lighting and sound often occur before a ghost is fully visible, signaling that something is about to happen. Over time, players begin to associate these cues with danger or opportunity, allowing them to anticipate events rather than react to them. This builds a more intuitive understanding of the game's systems. Finally, the core mechanics are introduced in a controlled training sequence with Professor Egad. Here, players practice capturing ghosts in an environment with no real risk. The process is introduced step by step, with players first learning positioning, then using the flashlight to stun ghosts, and finally using the poltergust to capture them. Because the player can repeat the sequence safely, the mechanics become familiar before being applied in the mansion itself. By combining environmental design, character cues, and structured interaction, the tutorial gradually builds the player's confidence by introducing mechanics in a controlled environment before applying them in the mansion.
Affordances describe the interactions between players and the game world that encourage engagement. They help maintain fairness, challenge, and skill development by shaping how players understand which actions are possible. This stat describes affordances as the action possibilities that emerge when a user interacts with a system toward immediate, tangible outcomes. In Luigi's Mansion 3, we see several clear examples. Luigi opens doors and drawers with handles. This teaches players that handles signal interaction. If it has a handle, Luigi can open it. This is a consistent and reliable mechanic. Luigi can also vacuum objects to reveal hidden coins. Players quickly learn that suction isn't just decorative, it's a tool for uncovering rewards. This encourages exploitation and reinforces the idea that interacting with the environment leads to tangible outcomes. The player learns that vacuuming weakens ghosts and slamming them finishes the fight. Real affordances matter because they give the players confidence. When actions constantly work, players feel like their choices matter and that they're progressing through skill, not just guesswork. Next, we have perceived affordances, what players believe they can do based on visual cues, sound cues, cultural expectations, and past experience. This idea connects to Don Norman's The Design of Everyday Things, which explains how people interpret the function of objects based on how they look. In Luigi's Mansion 3, perceived affordances shape how players interpret their environment. Curtains, tablecloths, loose objects, and decorations often shine, move slightly, or look loose. These cues suggest that Luigi should vacuum them. Players expect interaction because the game visually draws their attention to these objects. There's a trolley that looks like it should move. It has wheels, it's positioned at the side of the room, and it resembles a real-life movable object. But when Luigi tries to push it, nothing happens. This is a misaligned affordance. The object suggests movement, but the game doesn't allow it. Another example where players vacuum objects expecting hidden advantages like coins, gems, switches, or buttons. This belief is shaped by repeated reinforcement earlier in the game. Perceived affordances influence how players approach challenges. They guide attention, shape expectations, and help players form mental models of how the game world works. The third concept is feedback, the immediate response the game gives to validate the player's actions. Feedback is often called the silent teacher of games because it reinforces learning without needing explicit instructions. Feedback is essential because it confirms whether an action worked, makes the game feel responsive, motivates players to continue, helps players adjust their strategy, and signals progress or danger. For example, when Luigi vacuums a gem, it instantly appears in his gem count. This quick response tells the player they succeeded and encourages them to keep exploring. Together, real affordances, perceived affordances, and feedback create a learning loop. Real affordances support learning by giving players reliable mechanics. When Luigi opens a door and enters a new area, players feel their actions matter. Perceived affordances help players interpret their environment. They learn which objects are worth interacting with and which aren't. For example, after discovering the trolley doesn't move, players won't waste time trying that again. However, misaligned affordances can hinder player learning. If players can't trust their instincts, they may hesitate or second-guess future interactions. Finally, feedback strongly supports learning by confirming whether actions were successful. It helps players adapt quickly and stay motivated. In summary, real affordances, perceived affordances, and feedback work together to shape how players understand and navigate a game. When aligned, they create a smooth, intuitive, and engaging experience. When misaligned, they can cause confusion, but even that becomes part of the learning process.
I'm going to look at how Luigi's Mansion 3 tutorial follows 3 principles from GameFlow, a framework created by Sweetser and Weth in 2005 that helps explains what makes games enjoyable. The 3 principles I'll be focusing on are concentration, feedback, and challenge. So according to GameFlow, players should always have clear and manageable goals so they know what to do next. When goals are clear, players can stay focused instead of feeling confused or overwhelmed. In the last Resort Hotel tutorial, the game does this well most of the time. Professor Egad communicates with Luigi through a video call system, giving the player clear direction on where to go and what to do. The objectives are introduced one at a time. First, find your friends, then get the elevator button. However, there are moments where this breaks down. When Luigi first enters certain rooms, the game expects him to figure out interactions independently with very little guidance. For a first-time player playing this game, standing in a room full of interactive objects with no clear instruction on what matters can feel very overwhelming for the player. The goal is technically present but not always communicated clearly, which works against this game flow principle. And another principle I'll be talking about is feedback. GameFlow also says players need clear and immediate feedback so they know whether their actions were successful or not. The tutorial does a strong job of this in most situations. When Luigi takes damage, he flashes red and his health bar visibly drops, clearly communicating that something hurt him and it should be avoided. This feedback responses are consistent and easy to read. Where feedback falls short is in moments of failed interaction. For example, when Luigi approaches a trolley that looks like it should move but nothing happens, no sound, no visual reaction, no explanation. For a tutorial specifically designed to teach the player how the game works, silent failures are a missed opportunity. The contrast between the gem pickup feedback and the trolley non-responsive shows how inconsistent the feedback can be in this section. And moving to the third principle, which is challenge and skill, GameFlow argues that gems should match the difficulty of challenges to the player's current skill level. Challenges should be interesting enough to engage, but not so hard that they can become very frustrating. The first ghost encounters involves just 1 or 2 ghosts in a controlled environment. That said, the very first ghost combat sequence asks players to combine several actions at once. Aim, hold ZR to sustain suction, watch the ghost's eyes, time a button flash to stun, then continue vacuuming. For players already comfortable with dual stick controls, this feels natural, but for someone new to this, for someone new to the Nintendo Switch, the tutorial should be at its more accessible. The skill curve briefly spikes when it should be at its flattest. Overall, the Last Resort Hotel tutorial shows a solid understanding of game flow principles. It provides mostly clear goals, strong feedback in key moments, and gradual difficulty curve. However, the moments where goals become unclear, feedback disappears, or challenge spikes unexpectedly are precisely where players are most likely to disengage. In a tutorial, those gaps matter most because the entire purpose is to build player confidence and understanding before the rest of the game begins.
Alright, let's now move on into the player assumption and experience analysis. The game seems to assume that players are already comfortable with dual stick controls on the Nintendo Switch. There are quite a few buttons to keep track of. For example, Y is used for the section shot, and A is used for the straw ball. For first-time players, this can feel a little overwhelming and hard to memorize. An example that tests this assumption is the very first ghost encounter in the first floor, Grand Lobby. Player is asked to move with one stick and with the other, hold ZR to use poltergeist and time the straw ball flash with A, especially since ZR is a shoulder button. New players might not be able to immediately know where it is or how to use it comfortably. Secondly, the game also assumes that players are familiar with action-adventure game conventions, so elements like maps, collectibles such as gem, health hearts, currency, and two-gated progressions are rarely explained in detail. Instead, players are expected to understand what these systems represent. For example, losing heart can clearly signal an incorrect action. There are also many smaller mechanics that aren't really taught, such as peeking through holes in walls, which the game just expects players to recognize as something they can interact with. Later on floor 5 in the RIP suite, this pattern continues with the dark light device. The game does not heavily explain its use for revealing hidden interactions, such as uncovering ghosts or objects. Instead, players are expected to experiment and recognize when the device should be used. These assumptions definitely support experienced Switch players, people who already know how camera control works in 3D space or how to read subtle visual hints, but at the same time, they can exclude players who are new to Nintendo Switch, players who mostly use touchscreens, or anyone who struggles with multi-button coordination, even players with reading difficulties because they might miss the quick text prompts. Reflecting on it, I realized my analysis is filtered through the tutorials videos that I watched. Watching someone with no prior experience play through the tutorial will probably reveal a very different set of challenges and assumptions.
The tutorial in Luigi's Mansion 3 works as a guided learning experience built on structure, interaction, feedback, and gradual discovery. Catherine shows that the tutorial starts with fundamentals. Luigi's main objective, which is rescuing his friends and collecting elevator buttons, is introduced immediately, along with the core gameplay loop of exploring floors, solving puzzles, fighting ghosts, and progressing upward. This gives players a clear foundation before complexity increases. Joy highlights that the game teaches primarily through environmental cues rather than text. Luigi's animations, the eerie hotel setting, blocked paths, ghost encounters, and a simple HUD all signal risk, goals, and interactivity. Players learn by experimenting, observing, and responding to audio-visual feedback. Megan's affordance analysis shows how the tutorial communicates what can be interacted with. Doors, drawers, gems, and ghosts provide clear affordances, while misleading objects like the trolley create confusion. Effective affordances speed up learning, unclear ones slow it down. Lulu's game flow perspective reinforces this. The tutorial sets clear goals, provide instant feedback, and offers manageable challenges. Hints from Polterpup and Professor Egad keep players oriented, while sound effects and enemy reactions confirm successful actions. However, moments of weak guidance or multi-input combat can overwhelm beginners. Amy's player experience section adds that the tutorial assumes some prior gaming familiarity. Experienced players adapt quickly, but newcomers may struggle with aiming, timing, and multi-button actions, especially during ghost battles and requiring simultaneous inputs. Overall, the tutorial succeeds because its goals, feedback, and controls align, allowing players to learn naturally through play.
Clear cues, responsive feedback, and repeated practice build confidence. Still, occasional unclear affordances and assumed prior knowledge can hinder true beginners. Even so, Luigi's Mansion 3 demonstrates how strong tutorial design can effectively support player learning.